All rise. The Circuit Court of the State of Oregon for Multnomah County is now in session. The Honorable Christopher Rammers presiding.
All right, please be seated. And Mr. Overstreet, if you want to put the case on the record.
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. We're here for State of Oregon versus Nancy Lee Crampton Brophy, case number 18 CR 59251. Appearing on behalf of the State of Oregon, Sean Overstreet, OVERSTREET, bar number 114859. Ms. Brophy is present, and this is day 18 of trial.
All right, Ms. Herman.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nicole Herman, HERMANN, bar number 126353.
Good morning, Your Honor. Madeline Loeb, spelled L-O-E-B, bar number 17397.
And for defense, Ms. Weinmiller.
Morning, Your Honor. Chris Weinmiller with Ms. Brophy. Weinmiller is WINEMILLER, and my bar number is 863177.
And Ms. Maxfield.
Yes, Your Honor. Lisa Maxfield here with Ms. Brophy as well. My bar number is 844337, and my last name is spelled MAXFIELD.
All right, before we call the jury, I just wanted to go over some scheduling matters. I think we're all on the same page, but just to make sure, my understanding is the jury will not be needed Friday, that we'll use Friday for the issue of the witness that's been discussed earlier. Is that also the side's understanding?
Our understanding.
Your Honor, that is our understanding. We have one witness that we planned to call yesterday, and things went longer, and she's not able to return until Friday, so we're trying to work, unless she can appear by WebEx, so we're trying to juggle that, but that is our understanding, that we would not take testimony Friday. I mean,
Okay.
with the jury.
Well, so let me ask, I guess let me put it another way. I plan to tell the jury they will not be needed Friday unless what you're saying to me is, well, okay, all right,
There's no well.
okay.
No, we're just hoping to do that by WebEx.
Sure. Okay, then other than that, the time frame that we would use on Friday would be 9 to 12, and then I have a sentencing hearing at 1:30 that will probably go about 1:30 to 2:15. So why don't we say if we need time after 9 to 12 that it would be from 2:30 on. I don't know if we'll need the time or not, but I have the time if we need it. Does that also make sense to the sides? Okay, all right. In that case, anything else before we bring the jury in?
Yes, Your Honor. One other thing, and that is that hopefully, I mean, we have witnesses and we'd like to get them all on today. But because of just kind of the push of trying to provide the court with pleadings by close of business today, it's not going to happen by close of business today.
That's fine, as long as it's sometime today.
Okay. It'll be sometime today, and if we ran out of witnesses, if we could adjourn a little bit early, I can just tell the court that this is coming at us fast and furious.
Sure.
We're trying to absorb it all.
No, I appreciate that, and that's fine. That'll be fine. So if we wind up needing to end early, that is also fine. I guess the last thing I wanted to check, and maybe you don't know yet, we're projected to end on the 20th. If it becomes apparent, I guess what I would say is if it becomes apparent during the next week that that's going to be tight, I'd like to know sooner rather than later, because we can make accommodations such as shortening the lunch hour, perhaps starting a little bit earlier, whatever we need to do. But so far, the jury is under the impression that that will be it. So if we're going to run into issues, I want to know about them sooner rather than later.
Much will have to do with how things play out on Friday. I can tell the court, though, that we're prepared, or we're trying to be prepared to vigorously defend against this new false,
Sure.
what we believe to be false testimony, embarrassment investigation. But we don't want to make representations to the court now that would waive our right to challenge that testimony, either during
I
cross-examination
understand.
or.
No, I understand. And I'm not asking you to right now. I guess when I say I'd like to know as soon as possible, whatever happens on Friday, to the extent that changes anything, just let me know as soon as you can.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, let's go ahead then. And you had something too, Mr. Overstreet.
I did, Your Honor. We got an email last night at about, well, I actually don't recall exactly what time. I think about 8:30, 8:28 p.m. last night from Ms. Weinmiller, stating that they had, well, I'm not 100% sure. They referenced one of the witnesses that was called on Monday, Vicky Schmall.
Okay.
And Vicky Schmall had mentioned that she was introduced by a person named Tony.
Introduced
to
who?
Introduced to Dan by a person named Tony.
Okay.
That person apparently is Tony Hall. The email, and I'm open to clarification because I'm not 100% sure, but it seems to be that they learned of Mr. Hall through Vicky Schmall.
Okay,
The defense learned of Tony Hall through Vicky Schmall. They then provided an investigative report that apparently Mr. Hall was interviewed on Sunday, the 8th,
okay,
and this report was provided to us at 8:30 last night, 8:28 last night. And they then followed that up with that they intend to call this person as a witness this afternoon. This is not a person the state was made aware of, didn't know who this person was, in fact. And so it's a person that never appeared on any witness list whatsoever. We were not notified of this witness until last night. And it's very suspect, I will say. This was a person who apparently knew the Brophies all back in mid-2010s. This was a person who worked at OCI, left there in 2015, I believe, or 2016. Was very well aware of this case, has been following the case, has been talking to witnesses in this case, and then all of a sudden is calling defense, reaching out to defense. They did not find him. He's reaching out to them, wanting to insert himself into this trial as a witness. Some very concerning things in this report. And our own investigator then late last night reached out to him. He reiterated some of those things to her in addition to some other things. But nonetheless, we are objecting to this witness testifying at all, based on the fact that we didn't know who this person was. It was never disclosed to us. Apparently defense did know about him through another witness. I don't know when that was. But then the fact that this person has been following this trial and talking to our witnesses, and seemingly trying to insert himself into this trial with new information 4 years after the fact. He's never reached out to the police. He didn't reach out to law enforcement or our office. Instead, he's reaching out to defense to insert himself as a defense witness. So we're objecting to that testimony.
all right. Well, so I'm not concerned with who he's reaching out to, but I guess I would ask defense, there's sort of two issues as I hear them. One is, when did defense learn about the witness? And then more importantly, well, not more importantly, but I do think importantly is whether or not this witness has been hearing the testimony or paying attention to the testimony of other witnesses throughout the trial, because of course both sides moved and I granted a motion to exclude witnesses. I don't know if you know the answer to that, but to the extent you have the answer to these two questions, let's start with when and how the defense learned about the witness.
Your Honor, we just learned about him within the last few days. I'm a little embarrassed that we didn't figure out that he existed earlier. He was one of the instructors and in fact ran the dining room at OCI until the time he left, which was, I think, either in 2015 or 2016. So he knew Dan Brophy and worked side by side with him for a number of years, but was not there in June of 2018, and we had been focused on people who were there at the end. I had a brief conversation with him on Saturday just to kind of get a sense of who he was and what he might know, and determined that it would make sense for us to have an interview with an investigator. And we did that on Sunday. We spent a good part of the afternoon trying to arrange it and finally talked to him late afternoon on Sunday. And then because of the press of getting everything else done, didn't get that report actually generated into the prosecutors until yesterday. We wanted to make sure that Mr. Hall looked at it and was comfortable with the way we'd written it up, because everything had happened in such a hurried way. And he gave us his permission to forward that, and so we did. We take him to be a very knowledgeable and credible witness, and he does have current information. He talked with the Brophies in the year and the months before Mr. Brophy died, and again, are sorry that we didn't ourselves find him at a much earlier point in time, but that doesn't in any way diminish his knowledge of the situation. As far as watching, we did inquire about that, and he said that he has, he's seen some of the headlines, he's seen some of the news reports. He absolutely has not been looking at the live streaming, either on WebEx or can't remember which station is broadcasting it, but I think KGW or one of the stations is actually putting up all of the testimony for viewing, and he said he has not looked at any of that. So I think his knowledge is no deeper than the general public's. Obviously, people in Portland are aware that this trial is going on. I think people all over the country are aware that it's going on, but he has not been following the actual testimony.
And Mr. Overstreet had mentioned something about him talking to witnesses. What, if anything, do you know about that?
I don't know anything about that, but I will tell you that he knows, he worked at OCI for a good part of his career and has maintained good contact with a lot of those people, and I think they're all talking to each other. I mean, the idea that Mr. Wilkie and Mr. Bethel had not spoken with each other before Mr. Bethel testified earlier this week, I think it would stretch credulity. They know each other and they're talking some about this case. I have no reason to believe that he's been talking with other witnesses in a way about the substance of their testimony or trying to influence them, or that he's been influenced himself by them, that there's anything inappropriate. But this whole community, as the court knows, is pretty tight-knit, and we certainly have not all taken vows to be completely separated and out of contact during this time period, and I imagine his contact looks like the rest of theirs.
And what is the gist of his testimony?
I think the most important piece is, well, there are two important pieces. One is that he had conversations, first of all, initiated by Dan Brophy about seeking his advice, because he is a gun owner and is knowledgeable, seeking his advice about types of guns that the Brophies might purchase. And then secondly, one of his functions at OCI was that he was often the person who actually closed up at night, and so he has a sense of the security system and how that works, and could speak at least through 2015 to issues related to that. So that's a secondary issue, but we think also significant.
I'm sorry, what was the secondary issue? I missed that.
The security system, just because he locked up at night, he is in a position to speak to how the alarms worked, at least at the time he was there. He has reason to believe that did not change, hadn't changed between that time and Mr. Brophy's death.
All right, and so I want to make sure I understood the first thing you said. Your intention in calling him would be to talk about conversations he had with Mr. Brophy about gun advice?
Well, specifically what he had described as a demonstration that he did for Mr. Brophy. So it's his observations of Mr. Brophy during that demonstration, and what he was demonstrating.
Okay. Now, when is defense wanting to call this witness?
In terms of what we're trying to structure, it probably would work best to do it this afternoon, but we could do it tomorrow too. He is able to arrange transportation comfortably, but he uses a wheelchair, so it'd be nice if we could give, some certainty to when he needs to be here. He's probably a little less flexible than some of the other witnesses.
Okay. I mean, all right, so thank you. I mean, Mr. Overstreet, I guess what I'm thinking at the moment is this. I mean, it sounds like both sides have learned of witnesses during the course of the trial that they didn't know about earlier. So I'm not, part of your objection had to do with not being notified, and obviously if they don't know about the witness, they can't notify you. I don't know the extent to which he's talked to other witnesses. That's something I think would need to be explored a bit. But to understand your argument, I don't know that it's a discovery violation if defense doesn't know of the witness. So then it sort of leaves us with, what do we do with the evidence? And there may be multiple reasons to object to it, but exclusion of the evidence is a pretty drastic remedy. I'm certainly willing to conduct a 104 hearing to explore the issue of to what extent he's discussed the case with other witnesses. Was there anything else, though? So in other words, I'm not going to make a decision right now, but I guess I'm giving some indication as to how I'm leaning.
Yeah, and I understand that. I would just supplement what I said before in contrast to what Ms. Weinmiller said, and that is that Mr. Hall did tell our investigator late last night that the things that he has learned and discussed are things that he learned from others and on the news. So, I mean, it's just very problematic when our witness this late in the trial is, and take it back to why he reached out to defense. Because he heard the things that are being said about guns, he has decided that he has information now that would be helpful to the defense, and that's why he wants to reach out. So it's all based on the fact that he's been apprised of what's been happening in the courtroom. That's why he reached out. That was his entire motivation. Not just out of some altruistic, all of a sudden, he decided that maybe we would want to know this, or maybe defense would want to know this. He's doing it in response to what's happening in the courtroom. That in of itself is very problematic.
Well, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to not have him as a witness today. I think what we could do is set up a 104 hearing for tomorrow morning, just so I can hear directly from him a little bit more of the issues that the state is raising, and I can make a decision after I hear directly from him a little more about the circumstances of who he talked to and what about, and what has led to him coming forward at this point. So let's hold off on him until tomorrow. In the meanwhile, anything else before we call for the jury?
Not from the state.
Oh, I guess I would say, I don't know if Dr. Warford, I think I see her, it's fine if she wants to retake the stand. No, stay on for just a minute. I just want, just real quickly, Dr. Warford, I'm sure you know this, but just a reminder, you are still under oath that you took yesterday. And with that, let's, we can go off the record and get the jury. All right, everyone can be seated. Mr. Overstreet, when you're ready, you can continue with the cross-examination.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Warford, I want to make sure we have something clear. And that is that your testimony is that whenever the trauma begins, that the brain's response to trauma affects the formations of memories moving forward. Or
Not
can.
exactly. The 20 minutes to 4 hours is the worst time to interview somebody because there is so much disruption with the chemicals. However, there's been good studies that show what's called retrograde amnesia. And that can happen at the point of the trauma, the pathways that had been perhaps laid down, the cortisol impedes or disrupts them. And so the 20 minutes to 4 hours is the worst time to do an interview of someone. It's not just that no memories are there, but I've said that was the worst time to do an interview.
Right, okay. And you introduced this idea now of retrograde amnesia.
Well, I'd always said that the cortisol impedes memory. And so if it is, sometimes as Ms. Weinmiller had asked yesterday, was about having it go from short-term into long-term memory,
Right.
that it may not even get wired. However, the cortisol can disrupt. And again, as I'd said before, memory is like, in traumatic memory is like snapshots, because the cortisol interrupts the neural pathways.
So it's not that you will forget, it's that you could forget some things or most things, but you still might have some memories.
That, and you would still have whatever you had done, say, if there is something that you had done just as a matter of habit, it's likely that you're going to go, oh, you know what, this is what I usually do, this must have been what I did,
Right,
which
but
may or may not be accurate.
you're talking about confabulation, though.
Sort of. It's a form of, again, memory is not set in stone, but it is a form of trying to make sense of something.
Sure. I don't want to get into confabulation yet, though. I want to make sure we're talking about one issue at a time so that we can fully understand them.
Certainly.
So, do you have a time frame for when you do something, say sort of a mundane task or just something you normally do, or that how long is it going to take you to commit that memory so that once a traumatic episode happens, that memory has already been sort of secured?
I don't know that we have good science on that yet. We do have science, starting with Lenore Terr's work with children in trauma, that found that the memories are the snapshots. So in traumatized children, we found that, or Lenore Terr found that they remembered things after the fact as if it had started before. They remembered things that had happened before as if it happened after. So it's just a disruption of the memories. We don't have a good timeline. I don't know, and I think it's going to be unique and different how severe the trauma is. Is there one trauma upon another? There's going to be different aspects of it that are going to determine that.
Okay, maybe we can simplify it a little bit. Well, I guess first, would you agree that trauma in children is much different than trauma in adults?
Younger children, yes, by the time they get to be, say, teenagers, later teens, maybe not. And then again, the severity of the trauma is going to make a difference too.
Sure, but you would expect trauma in an intelligent 67-year-old woman to be able to handle trauma better than you would a child.
Not necessarily, again, depending on what the trauma is.
Okay. So you talked about Miss Brophy being a cognitive person. And in a cognitive person, you would expect when she's asked a question that she maybe is suffering some sort of forgetfulness about, that there would be a delayed response in a cognitive person.
It could be.
Well, I think you said that you would expect that from somebody like in a cognitive.
There could be a latency, yes, a delayed.
So when asked a question, somebody like Miss Brophy, if they truly don't remember something, you would expect a delayed response. Meaning she's going to take some time to think about it, then answer the question.
Could be. And then it can also be if you're walking around in a fog, you just make automatic statements. You're on automatic pilot.
Okay. So you listen to the death notification.
Yes.
You heard that Ms.
It's been a
Brophy,
while since I listened to it, but I
okay, but
did.
you heard that Ms. Brophy didn't really have any delayed response. She answered the questions pretty much right away.
As I recall, yes.
Yeah, there wasn't she never says, oh, I don't remember, I can't recall what I was doing this morning, things like that.
But she also makes,
No,
comments.
no, hang on. Did she ever say, when talking about what happened that morning, I don't remember? Or was there a delay to that question?
I do not recall that she ever said, I don't remember.
Okay, and there wasn't a delay when she was asked about what was going on that morning.
As I recall, that's correct.
Okay, now, this is where I want to bring in confabulation. You said, sometimes when people don't remember, they might still respond, but with something that they normally do. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. Now, what Ms. Brophy said when asked about at the very beginning of the interview, before she was notified of her husband's death, she said, Dan came upstairs to take a shower. Not Dan normally comes upstairs to take a shower. Is that correct?
As I recall,
Okay.
that, yes.
She said, I didn't get out of bed. Not, I normally don't get out of bed. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. She said, we talked about a leak. Not, we normally talked about a leak. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was one of her last memories of
Okay.
talking to him.
So she's, in your opinion, you would say she's not confabulating at that point because she's telling the detectives immediately upon their question exactly what she was doing that morning.
I'm struggling because there is a,
It's a yes or no.
Well,
She said,
it's-
this is what I was doing. This is what Dan was doing. And to include another thing, she says, Dan left at 7:05, 7:10-ish.
that one I do remember, and that one
She
was
said
ish.
Dan left at 7:05 or 7:10-ish, didn't she?
7:05 or 7:10-ish, which would, again, is not an absolute. That was the one that I do remember that was not absolute.
She didn't say he normally leaves at 7:05 or 7:10-ish. She said he left. He took a shower, he got dressed, he left at 7:05, 7:10-ish. Isn't that what she said?
As I recall, she had made it ish, which was not that it was absolute, but that it was, and the way that that was worded, as I recall, was that it was more along the lines of this is kind of would be normal. She didn't use that word, but the wording in there, as I recall, was that was what it was.
I mean, because she added an ish, that all of a sudden she's now just recalling something that normally happens?
So she's interviewed at 10:48. She answers question, noting that he normally does, blah, blah, blah.
She talks about normally walking the dogs, right? Normally, I'm not talking about those. I'm not talking about what she said she normally does. I agree, he said those things. Talking about the things that she's recalling specifically happened that morning. And she's supposedly doing that during this time of trauma.
She's doing this at 10:47, and she'd been,
Okay, I want to talk about something else now. You talked about that you did these tests, right? Could you define for the jury what the term malingering is?
sure. It is when somebody is faking or feigning and sometimes it's a psychological condition. Sometimes it is feigning lack of legal knowledge. Sometimes it is faking, it can be faking memory. It can be faking or lack thereof. It can be, but typically it's that you would see that there is a attempt to, in criminal cases, we typically see it where it is an attempt for somebody to make themselves look more perhaps psychotic, or that they don't understand the system, or they are more, they have they have memory problems, so there's that aspect of it. And it typically gets addressed when there is a GEI, guilty except for insanity evaluation, or an aid and assist. It doesn't get assessed typically with a mitigation report.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that too. I want to ask you if you read an article called Amnesia and Crime. Have you heard of that? I'm not sure how to say the last name, Bourget.
Borchet.
by Whitehurst?
There were several articles that I read, that may be one.
Okay, and are you aware that that article talks about claims of amnesia in criminal cases are reported in an estimated range of 10 to 70% of homicides? Does that sound right?
I know that it is higher within this country because there is, not the claims of malingering, you're correct. But
Okay.
it is often claimed.
And I think you talked about this a little bit yesterday, that amnesia for an offense is actually commonly associated with excessive consumption of alcohol with or without the concurrent use of illicit or illicit drugs.
Often can be, because I
Right.
believe we were talking about confabulation and memory.
And you don't have any evidence of that in this case?
There's no evidence
There
of
hasn't been any
substance use.
suggestion to you that Ms. Brophy was under the consumption of alcohol or drugs?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So when we're talking about this idea of amnesia, knowing that it's claimed in 10 to 70% of homicides, there's no drugs or alcohol alleged, and the fact that you've talked about the level of intelligence that Ms. Brophy has, that same article says that highly intelligent malingerers are more adept at feigning amnesia for crimes and thus may evade detection and less frequently receive a diagnosis of malingering.
Sure.
You agree with that?
I agree with that science, yes.
Okay, so knowing that Ms. Brophy is highly intelligent, knowing that that person can avoid detection at a better rate, knowing that she's not under the use of drugs or alcohol, knowing that you've already called into question her credibility using the MMPI and the PAI, why did you not choose to test or identify if Ms. Brophy was possibly malingering? You didn't do any testing, is that correct?
Well, that's not true. That's not accurate.
Okay.
The MMPI actually has a malingering scale, and she didn't hit on that, on either one.
Where is that?
The Negative Impression Management Scale is often elevated in malingering. I'm sorry, on the PAI, on the PAI, you've got the negative impression management, and hers is, again, very low. There are malingering scales on the MMPI, and it does not hit in the protocols.
Okay, and is this possible because this is sort of a non-traditional psych eval? Because you said you did this as mitigation, is that correct?
That was my understanding, yes.
Okay, and is that because that you were actually asked to only answer 3 questions by the defense?
I was that's asked to answer those 3 questions, yes.
Okay, so even though you have all this information, all those things I just talked about that apparently did not lead you to believe that it would be necessary to test Ms. Brophy for malingering, you did no further testing or analysis.
Again, the MMPI has, when it hits for malingering, it will come up in the protocol. It doesn't come up in the protocol.
Right, but in the same report, it says that you can't necessarily trust what she's saying.
But it still would show, that's actually, your point actually makes my point, which is that if it had hit to such a degree of malingering, it would have come up in the protocol.
But this is somebody who may go undetected. It says right there, and you agreed with that somebody of Miss Brophy's intelligence and lack of drugs or alcohol can go undetected.
Can. I agree that the science shows that it is. You're asking me if I think that applies to Miss Brophy, and I'm saying no.
Right. There are malingering tests available that you chose not to use. Is that correct?
We could use the ILK, which is a test of legal knowledge. There was nothing implying that she didn't understand the system. We could have used the SIRS, but usually I will go with that when I have these elevations of the, there's a inverted V when we typically see for malingering. That doesn't apply on her profile. There is
I'm asking you about the tests that could have been done.
could have been
You
done.
could have done the symptoms validity test to identify malingered amnesia. That's specifically what it's designed for, isn't that right?
Well, it's also has caveats as the other tests do, that there's warnings of over
Sure.
one piece. The other piece is that would apply if at the time she was telling me that they were saying, I don't remember. That doesn't apply for somebody who maybe a year before, 2 years before, was saying that they didn't have memory aspects of recall.
Right. Okay, so you chose not to use that test. You chose not to use the structured inventory and malingered symptoms test.
No, those are the same. SIMS and the structured there's a structured inventory of reported symptoms, the SIRS, and the SIMS that look specifically for malingering. But again, typically malingering is not assessed in a mitigation report. And if there were indications of malingering, I was asked to answer 3 questions. So a forensic eval goes at the referral questions, and that is what I was looking at.
And so I guess I don't want to lose that point. You didn't do all of the things that you could have done to give us a better picture about what's going on with Ms. Brophy because you were only asked to identify 3 questions, and you based your answers of those 3 questions based on meeting Ms. Brophy and 28 pieces of evidence that was supplied to you by the defense. Yes or no?
That is not totally accurate. I cannot answer yes or no to a question that is not totally accurate.
You based your answers to those 3 questions on something else?
Again, I base my questions on the data that I have. And as you pointed out, I've had 12 interviews, and you said that it was 31. I went back last night and looked. I was actually given only 16.
Oh,
There
so
were-
you weren't even given all the interviews.
until last night. Well, but hear me out.
No,
So
no, I'm asking the questions.
Yes,
okay?
sir.
Now
So-
all of a sudden you've got new information that you weren't provided before.
No, I'm
We're
telling
given
you.
new reports.
I was given,
Answer the question, ask the question, let her answer it.
You were given new reports.
I asked to see, because you kept saying 31.
Yes or no question.
Yes, I was given the 31 reports last night.
Okay. And you were not provided those before.
That is correct.
And you were not provided with a lot of information that we had talked about before.
I was provided with a lot of information. So for example, I went back and looked to see the JADE PDF file has 873 pages. There was another file that was in there that I didn't log because the vast majority of it was not relevant. It was a Bates report that had 874 pages. Lots of like listings of license plates and numbers, and so it was not relevant to what I was asking, so I didn't include it. I looked at a lot of things that I didn't put in here because it wasn't relevant.
But you also wouldn't know what you were missing because this was provided to you by the defense.
There's an aspect of truth of what you're saying, which is why I asked last night to see the other reports to make up the 31.
Of course. And you had mentioned, so to do these 3 questions, you said you spent about 50 hours, and what is it that you're charging the defense to answer those questions?
I'm sorry?
How much are you making today?
Oh, well, my,
50 hours.
I'm sorry?
Over the course of the 50 hours.
Oh, you asked my regular hourly rate?
I'm
Or?
asking you how much you're making.
Oh, let's see, I did 50 hours, and then I've got, I think, another 15. And I do charge $200 an hour, so is that 60 hours and at $200 an hour? Mhm.
At 50 hours.
I think that the 50 was what had gotten billed, and then yesterday, today, we'll probably add, and then the reviewing for last night,
Oh.
we'll add some hours,
So about 66 hours.
about 60
At
hours.
$200 an hour. Okay. And it's true that this is what you do for a living now, correct?
Yes,
You don't actually participate in seeing patients, treating patients, things like that.
yeah, after 27 years, I quit doing that in November of 2019.
All you do is meet with people in a criminal setting and provide reports and then testify.
Sometimes I'm asked to not provide reports.
Sure.
And then sometimes I don't know what happens to reports. Sometimes they get buried.
In fact, in this case, you were asked to not provide a report.
Excuse me?
Well, you did all this testing between 2019 and 2021, but you didn't provide a report. The date of your report is 5 days after this trial started.
Yeah, and I had written everything up. I'm trying to remember. I will honestly know, I don't remember why there was such the delay. There was some typos I know that I needed to do, which would have gotten to you before the trial started. And then I had thought I had sent it and found out that I hadn't sent it. And it was unfortunately sitting in my draft box.
No, I don't have any
And that's on
questions.
me.
All right, there was a little bit of.
Sorry, I don't have any other questions.
Okay, all right, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Warford, were you ill in March of this year?
I'm sorry?
Were you ill in March of this year?
Yeah, I came down with COVID in early March.
Okay, and then shortly after you recovered, did you finalize that report and send it to us?
Yes.
And with an apology for having overlooked it?
That and then there were some, there are certain things that are formatted And so, for example, there's a part of my report will say the content is blah, blah, blah. And then usually I put 3 X's in, and sometimes I forget to put it in, and the attorney will catch it, and I send it back to me, and then I have to fill it in. And so I believe that there was a typo in a couple areas where I'd put in X's and hadn't filled it in, and I had to redo that.
Right, but you just said that you thought that you'd sent the final a little bit before you had, but that was during this period that you were ill.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about these questions about what you were given and what you reviewed. You started working on the case, as you'd said, in 2019.
Yes.
So this spanned not quite 3 years by the time you finalized your report, and not quite 3 years by today's date, but it's been quite a while.
Yes.
When you went back last night to refresh yourself as to exactly what you'd been provided, I think you just told us that you found that some of those file names that are referenced in your report actually refer to large composite files of police reports, things that came from the discovery. Is that what you were trying to indicate?
Yes.
Okay, and I think you said that one of those was 873 pages long,
Yes.
and another one was 874 pages long.
Yes.
Were you able to at least skim through those last evening?
I skimmed through the Bates one because I was trying to figure out why I hadn't included it. And then I realized that it was either already subsumed under the Jade file, or it was like a list of license plates of. that
Okay,
they
I'm
were-
going to ask you about that, but I'm asking you whether last night you were able to skim through those reports, those long reports you just described.
Yes.
Okay. And I heard you the first time, that part of what you were seeing there seemed to be very perfunctory police matters. When you say license plates, I think you're referring to the process of collecting all the license plates through some sort of photo identification procedure, and then trying to figure out who those belong to, just as a way of identifying who's present when
Yes.
something happens.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Is there any reason that that sort of thing would need to be incorporated into your report?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, but you did review that enough to recognize that it was not something that you needed to incorporate?
Sure, because sometimes things get tucked in the middle, and I want to be sure I catch those.
Okay. Okay, and you also indicated that you had asked last evening what the questions were about with the 31 reports from us.
Mm-hmm.
And did we provide those to you when you
did.
made that request?
You did.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as Defense 360. Put some flags on some of these. I'd just like to run through that so you can explain whether the difference between the ones that you had and the ones in this set of 31 would be germane to your report, or something that you would normally expect to receive during an evaluation like this. The first one is from a student at OCI, is that correct?
And if forgive me, but what I did was, is that Adam Johnson?
Uh-huh.
Okay, yes. So just to clarify, what I did is I took the 16 that I had, I compared them to the 31 you gave me yesterday. Then I went back and looked at those other ones that Mr. Overstreet kept alluding to yesterday. And so I just have notes of what was in those, okay?
Right, and we're going to go through that. I'm asking you to look at the first one.
Yes,
Is that the report of a student at OCI?
yes,
Okay, and his name's Adam Johnson.
yes.
Was there anything in that report that seemed to you to be important to your evaluation, or something that you would have wanted to see?
Not really. He was a student. It seemed like it was a general report. I mean, he was a student. He
Did
knew
it have
school.
anything to do with Nancy Brophy or Dan Brophy?
Your Honor, I'm objecting to her just reading off these reports. If she can talk about how it formed her opinion overall and whether it changed her opinion, but just to read these reports, these defense investigator reports, would be improper.
Well, she hasn't read yet.
But I
What was
feel
the-
like we're getting there, though. That's why I was.
No, I understand. And so we're not there yet, but can you repeat the question?
I think she's already answered it. I asked her whether there was something in here that would have been germane to her report.
Right, I think she has answered that, so I think we can, so on that question, I'll overrule the objection, but if you think we get there, feel free to raise it again. Go ahead.
Okay, and then the next one is a woman named Amy Schrader. Did you have that one?
As of last night, not previously, yes.
Okay, did you see anything in that report that would have been germane to the assessment that you were conducting?
No.
I'm going to ask you the same question about all of these so we can speed this up a little bit. I believe you had the next two. And then there's one from an individual named Curtis Marler, who was a manager at the Starbucks on Jefferson. Did you have that one?
I did last night.
No, I'm asking you.
Oh,
if you
previously?
previously
I did not
had it.
have this one previously.
Okay, did you see anything in that Marler report that would have been germane to your assessment?
No.
Okay, and that was a report of somebody who was a manager at a Starbucks across the street.
Correct.
The next one I believe you had,
Yes.
as well as the next.
Yes.
There is then a report from a neighbor named Donald McConnell. Did you have that one?
I did not. Just a second. I did not.
Okay, did you see anything in that one that seemed like it was particularly important?
Not that was relevant to those three questions.
Then the next one is a woman named Ellen Levine,
Correct.
and that one you did not have?
I did not have that before.
Okay, is that a woman who lives nearby who was out walking her dog that morning?
Who lives by OCI that was walking her dog that morning, yes.
Okay, anything in that was important to your assessment?
I'm going to object to that. She's reading from the report.
Right, I will sustain that part. I'll have disregard the last answer that was given.
Your Honor, I did that only because she's testified. That's already information that the jury has.
I understand, but what she's limited to right now is whether or not this changes her viewpoint without reference to specific facts that these witnesses said.
The next one is from an individual named Francisco Jaramillo,
Correct.
who worked in the neighborhood.
Correct.
Okay, did you have that?
I did not previously.
And the one following that is from an individual named Fred Hartvet, who's a colleague, a co-worker of Mr. Jaramillo's.
Correct.
And that also is one you didn't have?
Correct. I didn't have anything about the BMWs. Yes, correct.
Would the content of those somehow been important to your assessment?
No. They don't refer to Ms. Brophy or Dan.
Right. So are the others, there's 31 reports, and I don't know that we need to go through all of them. If you could go to Josh Howell.
Okay.
Who owned a home in the neighborhood. Did you have that one?
I did not have that one.
And then when I say the neighborhood, he had owned a home in the neighborhood of OCI, is that correct?
Correct.
Was there anything in that report that would have been important to you?
Nothing related to the Brophies.
Have we gotten to any reports yet that are the type of material that you would expect to receive in preparing for an evaluation or an assessment like this?
We have not. In terms of have we used, for anything that is previous to this, is nothing. There was one report that I did see. Sorry,
hang on a
right?
second.
No, there was nothing previously.
Okay,
Correct.
so let's go to an individual named Rick Kraft.
Okay.
Did he provide some video to the police? Is he from a neighboring business and provided some?
Objection.
I'm going to sustain it.
Well,
I'm going to have this jury step out for just a minute. just want to make sure the parties are understanding my previous ruling and why I made it. As I understood it, the state is objecting to this witness testifying as to hearsay contained in these reports. I assume that the only way she would know that Rick Kraft had a home by OCI was that he wrote that in some form. It's his statement about where he lived. If I'm mistaken, let me know, but my ruling is that she can't testify as to the hearsay that are contained in these reports, but she can rule on whether or not, now having reviewed them, they impact her overall conclusion. Am I missing something on whether or not that's hearsay?
Well, I think what I was trying to do is just simply identify these people and what the substance of the report was without getting into hearsay. But Your Honor, the state asked a number of questions about this yesterday, clearly implying that we were cherry picking what we were giving her and we were withholding from her pertinent evidence. And I think having her just simply say it didn't seem pertinent isn't sufficient to counter the impression that the state created. Many of these reports are from people who did nothing more than provide video to PPB, surveillance video. And I think the jury does need to understand a little bit about the substance of the reports and not just that she considers none of them important or germane.
And I want to make sure, did I understand the state's objection correctly?
Yes, Your Honor. And what Ms. Weinmiller just said is not an exception to the hearsay rule. In addition, we're getting into an area now where she's testifying about something that wasn't in the scope of cross, meaning she's saying, okay, yeah, I have these reports now. Now I'm testifying that these are things that didn't change my opinion based on their contents, but not acknowledging that these people were also interviewed by the police and that she's not considering that information. And the jury's not getting to hear that, so it's a bit misleading as well.
All right, well, here's where I'm at. I do think under cross-examination it was brought up that she had, it was repeatedly implied that there were 31 interviews and that she had only read a portion of them. So I think it is fair to rebut that inference by asking, now having read these other ones, does it change your viewpoint? But I stick with my ruling on the hearsay. I haven't heard an exception to it. So the limits are going to be asking her if she has now read these reports and whether or not they affect her overall opinion. If there is some exception to hearsay in one of them, you can certainly let me know. Yeah. No, let's go off record. All right, everyone can be seated. And Ms. Weinmiller, you can continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Dr. Warford, I don't want to belabor the point, but is it fair to say of the ones that we've gone through so far that none of the reports that you didn't have until last evening are ones that you would have wanted to have and that you would have considered or put some weight on in preparing your evaluation, your assessment?
I may have wanted, but there was nothing relevant in those documents. I may have wanted, just because I like to see everything, but there was nothing relevant in those documents that applied.
Okay, meaning you would have wanted all 5,000 pages of the discovery and everything that we
That-
produced?
That's why I had a graduate student, yes. I mean, that's what I always ask for, is everything. But I do want to see everything. But there was
Okay,
nothing in these documents that would have, I would not have put these documents in my report because they're not relevant.
Okay, so what you're saying is you like to do your own review to decide what's relevant, but all of these would have gone in the not relevant pile?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So let's talk then about, I think one of the first questions that council asked you on cross is whether you were able to consider any input from Dan Brophy.
That's correct. I believe that was one of the first early questions.
Uh-huh. Did you, because Mr. Brophy obviously wasn't able to participate or contribute to the evaluation directly, was that one of the reasons that that text thread was important to you?
Absolutely.
And did you feel that being able to observe and incorporate sort of his contribution to that text thread was in some ways an important source of information to get some input about his thought process?
Correct.
Now, yesterday, there were some questions also about whether somehow you had not received all of the text. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And council showed you an exhibit that was green and blue. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as Exhibit 361.
What is it?
This is what she had. And what's been marked as Exhibit 212. And ask you whether to identify what 361 is.
361 is the text messages as I received them in a electronic form. It is a listing of them.
When you say a listing, but is it the actual text?
It is the actual text. It is just done as a, it's just listed with the number. It looks like it might,
Let me walk you through this, okay? Okay, so you received that quite some time ago,
yes,
right? And that is what appears to be a printed out PDF of the text thread.
correct.
And it contains the date of the exchange
Yes,
and the parties to the exchange
yes,
and the actual substance of the text exchange.
yes.
And what is the starting date of that thread?
4/15/2016.
Okay, and what's the very last text that's there? I'm not asking you to read it, I'm just asking you to give us the date.
June 2nd, 2018.
Okay. Would you refer to Exhibit 212 now? Does that appear to be the exhibit that council showed you yesterday?
It is. Yes, this format, yes.
Okay, and what's the starting date on that text thread?
4/15/2016.
Does that match the one that you had?
It does.
Okay, and what's the ending, what's the very last text there?
June 2nd, 2018.
Okay, and does that match the one that you had?
It does.
Were you able to do some spot checking to make sure that the content of the thread was the same?
I did.
Did you find any discrepancies?
I did not.
Can you tell well, is it fair to say that the version that you had, the early version that you were given, It's in black and white. It doesn't have any colors, correct?
Correct.
And is it formatted differently?
In terms of, as opposed to the bubbles, yes, yes.
Yes, okay, and you referred to bubbles. Does 212, the more colorful one, does that actually have the text in bubbles, sort of the way we normally visualize text threads?
Correct.
And is each exchange in 212, that colorful version, is each of those exchanges formatted so that it takes up more space?
Correct.
And that, does it appear to you that but for the formatting, the content, substantively, those two threads are the same?
It does appear that way to me.
Thank you. I'm gonna get those out of your way because you've got an awfully lot up there. Thank you. So you had indicated yesterday while you were testifying that you wanted to expand on or elaborate on some answers that you were asked to provide about the MMPI-2, and then you did the same thing very shortly thereafter in what I took to be really a related or continuation of the discussion about the hair psychopathy scoring. And I think that you felt that the way that your answers was limited wasn't allowing you to provide complete information. And I wanted you to go back to complete those answers now.
Okay. The area that I,
Objection, Your Honor, hasn't been a question.
I agree. Sustain, ask a question.
So when you were talking about the MMPI 2 yesterday, and the Pearson Corporation, when they return those tests to you, when they return the results to you, there is some language that they include, some cautions. And you were reviewing the cautions with the prosecution, and you were asked whether that caution would have impacted your assessment and how, and whether you had adequately taken that into consideration. And I'd like you to tell us, do you feel that you took those cautions into consideration, and how did they impact your assessment?
I always take the cautions because it was part of our training about test development. And so I know that the cautions are there, and when I look at a computer-generated protocol, I know to take in considerations of individual differences.
Okay, so how did you do that in this situation? Can you apply that to this?
Sure. And as I said, I believe yesterday with you, was that there are aspects of the MMPI-2 that were, in my mind, problematic. Not just my mind, others as well. And so it was republished first as the MMPI-2 RF and then republished as the MMPI-3. They incorporated more research into the MMPI-3. It is more current. The MMPI-2, as I mentioned before, was normed in 1989. The original was normed in the 1950s in Duluth, Minnesota. In Minnesota, thus the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory name. And so with each version, they have expanded who they incorporated into and what demographics they looked at. So I think the MMPI-3 is a better validated, a better research product than the MMPI-2. However, it is a point of data, as I think I said in the first day yesterday, was everything is a point of data.
Okay, but specifically the part of the exchange that I'm thinking about had to do with the caution that was offered in the MMPI-2 and how you incorporated that and how you addressed that.
Sure. And the caution is that it is not, that it is meant to be one point of data that is used by a qualified clinician. Well, psychologists, this is kind of our domain. Even psychiatrists typically are not trained on MMPIs. Other mental health professionals are typically not trained on the MMPIs. And so there's a caution that this is an overview and we need to consider that. The problem with actuarial data, which is what the MMPI 2 was more based on, is that you have a high false positive sorts of things. So as I said before, there's different scales, and each scale they would say, okay, if you have an elevated on this scale, it means this based on the science. But if they had, let's say it's a scale 4, and so they had 100 people take scale 4, and 20 of them scored, the 20 people who had this elevation on scale 4 had this trait, okay? Now, the other 80 has a high elevation on this, but there's not enough of them to put into a population. They went with where the 20 or 30 people were. And so you might still be looking at a small population, even though the elevation is on that particular scale. So those are part of the cautions. The other caution is that some of the original research on it, such as the way that they were named, later research showed that it wasn't a valid name for the scale. There was some later research that showed the idea was that with the original development was that you gave people who had a disorder and people who were basically family or friends who were visiting and they were also taking and they didn't have the disorder. So they gave them a lot of sentences. Originally it was over 1,100 that they pared down to 564, I believe. But they gave them a lot to see what differentiated them. And so they came out with that. They came out with what was called subtle and obvious scales. So an obvious scale was, are you depressed? That's obvious. It's face validity. You know what you're looking at. There were subtle things that they found, and this is for example purposes only, not accuracy, okay? But it's like, do you wear baggy jeans? And the people who are more depressed wore baggy jeans. Those are the subtle pieces. But over time, what happened was the research on the subtle showed that it wasn't as valid as they originally thought. So for the MMPI 2, when it came out, they did some adjustments because they realized that the scales were not what they were originally thinking they might be for some of them. And they went with a 3-point scale. Well, again, you might have out of 100 people have this 3 points, and the most common profile is this 30 people. And so that became the statements that are in the MMPI, even though there are other people who don't fit this. So we have to be cautious.
So how do you exercise that caution, though? And I'm asking you specifically in this assessment, in this evaluation.
Two things. One is that's why we get a thorough history before, and then we look to see, does this make sense and how does this make sense? The second one, and we were fortunate, I think, in this case, more recently, is the MMPI 3 came out, and it did a lot of cleanup work of those of us who had complaints about the MMPI 2. And so with the MMPI 3,
You did administer the MMPI 3?
yes.
Okay.
So it will make, I know you can't read it, but it'll make statements. And then a lot of these statements there'll be a footnote, and you can go in and look at, so these are the correlates of where you can find that. And then what they also did in the MMPA 3 that I am very grateful for, is then they added the list of research to substantiate what we're saying in terms of the profile of the protocols.
And this is all being returned to you as part of that report from the Pearson Corporation?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So to get back to this question of what you did in this case to ascertain the validity of that, you're saying one of the things you did was to administer the MMPI 3.
Yes.
Okay. And then you relied on some other sources of information that you'd already developed. You did some cross-checking. Can you
Yes.
describe that more thoroughly?
Well, again, in the write-up itself, it's done into categories. So it'll be my observations, behavioral observations, it'll be the person's self-report, it'll be the psychological testing, it'll be collateral documents. And then when the analysis goes, then you kind of meld it all together. So there are no reports of Ms. Brophy having a history of mental illness. The MMPI, particularly the MMPI 3, shows no history of mental illness.
Okay, but the MMPI two did as well, right?
It did as well too.
Right, so I'm
Again, it's,
asking now just about that elevated scale that Mr. Overstreet was concerned about yesterday.
yeah, and the only one that's elevated is the K scale, which is a correction scale. It typically people who are have higher or come out of higher socioeconomic status will tend to, again, be more sophisticated. They score higher on that. So that doesn't surprise me given Ms. Brophy's background.
Okay, but just to clarify, I want to make sure I'm tracking. The scale that you're addressing was present or showed at a slightly elevated range on the MMPI 2, but not on the MMPI 3?
I think you're correct, but give me a second. Correct.
Okay. And then as a part of that same discussion, you then moved into talking about why you administered that hair psychopathy scoring, and whether that gave you some additional insight into this particular issue.
Well, the hair psychopathy was again many in domestically violent relationships. There's actually not necessarily going to be elevations on the MMPIs or the PAI. There's some maybe on aggression on the PAI, but then the question had been, how do you go from 0 to murder? And somewhat my flip comment had been, well, you could if you're a psychopath, and I believe I was asked if there was a test to address that, and I was like, yes. And then I scored the MMPI. I'm sorry, the hair.
And you did that at our request?
Yes.
Okay. Were there tests that you wanted to administer, that you thought you should administer, that we encouraged you not to?
No, I have had cases where that's been, but not with your case, no.
But not this one.
No, not this one.
Thank you.
No.
So let's move to something completely different. There was quite a bit of discussion about when something is said that turns out to be untrue, that being a lie, and what the significance of that is. And I'd like to clarify with you, from your perspective as a psychologist, is it accurate to say that every time somebody says something that turns out not to be true, that's a lie?
No, I think sometimes it's a misunderstanding, a misperception, a misunderstanding of the question, there's lots of possible explanations.
So something can be untrue, can be admitted to be untrue, but that doesn't reflect on the person's intent to be truthful. There's nothing, that does not tell you whether the person intended to be untruthful.
Correct.
Okay. And the word lie, as you understood it when you were testifying yesterday, was that there was an intent to be untruthful.
I mean, in terms of the hair psychopathy?
No, I'm talking about the discussion that you had yesterday about lying.
Okay. I do think that with lying, there is this intent. So I can give you an example from yesterday, actually, was again, I went back because I was confused of why I didn't look at all 31, which is, again, so I said, no, I didn't use all of them. And then I went back last night and realized I didn't have all of them. That wasn't a lie. I was telling the truth as I knew it or as I believed it to be. I wasn't attempting to deceive.
Right. Right. All right. So let's turn to the death notification. You were able to review both the audio and the transcript of the conversation that Detectives Posey and Merrill had with Nancy Brophy on June 2nd, the morning of June 2nd.
Correct.
And have you been able to listen to some of the testimony in this trial so far?
I have.
Okay. Is there any reason to believe, based on the information that you've reviewed, that Nancy Brophy had no idea whatsoever that Dan Brophy was the person who had been shot at OCI until, during that death notification, Detective Posey told her it was Dan?
Could you say that again, please?
Based on your review of that transcript or of the audio of that death notification, is there any reason that you would believe that Nancy Brophy had no idea that Dan Brophy was the person who had been shot until 7 minutes into that interview with the detectives? Detective Posey finally said to her, Dan Brophy, it's Dan. Dan's the one who's been shot.
And I am struggling with the absolute knowing. I think there's a cognitive knowing, and then there's a visceral fear.
Uh-huh.
And so the fact that she shows up, they escort her to a van, he's not there. I think there's that intuitive knowing, but not absolute knowing. And there's, again, the adrenaline, the fear, those sorts of things would go in.
Mm-hmm. But that would have started much earlier with the notification that there'd been an incident at OCI.
Correct.
Okay. And in that same interview, doesn't Nancy Brophy actually respond to the detectives by saying, I got that. I
I
know.
kind of figured that, yeah.
But people gave me sad look. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but
Yeah, I think
essentially
it was like
people
puppy
gave me
dog looks
sad
or something,
looks.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In that interview, you were asked some questions this morning about what Ms. Brophy remembered on that day and in that interview. And you were asked some very specific questions about how that exchange went. Do you have that in front of you?
I'm sorry, the interview? Do I have which in front
Right,
of
the
you?
one that we've been referring to as the death notification.
I have my notes. I don't have that out. I mean, I don't have that printed out. I just have it within my notes.
Okay. The passage that you were asked about specifically was her describing what had happened that morning.
Yes. And is that the passage where she says, well, normally things go on?
Exactly, that's what I was going to ask you. When she's describing Dan's departure, doesn't she qualify that by saying that's normally when he leaves?
That as I recall it, yes.
Okay. The last questions I want to ask you about have again to do with this concept of traumatic shock inducing or actually causing some inability to form memories, having an impact on memory and the chemical process that causes that. And you used the phrase this morning, well, first of all, is amnesia the term that's used by psychologists to describe a loss of memory? Is that actually a scientific term, or is that just what the rest of us say?
No, it is. I think I tend to think more of kind of a dissociative episodes or periods, but amnesia is probably a more it's probably more commonly referred to.
Okay.
And probably more understood as amnesia.
Okay, so you used the term this morning, retrograde amnesia. And why don't you define that for us?
So from a point, and we don't know exactly what point of time, because of the cortisol blushing, the memory gets impaired or disrupted, or all of our memories are just neural pathways that get linked, and the cortisol impairs that, and it can disrupt that, it can impede it from happening, but that's what happens.
But what I'm asking you is specifically, what does that phrase retrograde amnesia mean? It sounds like it's a particular type of amnesia, and that's what I want you to
Yes,
address.
so it's from that point backward is
Okay.
retro.
So from the point of the shock backwards, whatever that trauma is backwards?
From the point of the flooding of cortisol, yes.
Okay, okay. And is there a corollary to that from that point forward?
Anterograde,
Okay, and are those basically the two kinds of amnesia?
typically, yes.
So if one doesn't remember what happened up to the point of the shock or the flooding of cortisol specifically, that's retrograde amnesia. And
If the things
then,
that prior, yes, it would.
right, if you don't remember what happened up to the point of the cortisol flooding, that's retrograde amnesia. Okay, and then what's the other word?
Anterograde.
Anterograde.
That's like when you're walking around in a fog and things are just not clicking. They're just not wiring.
Okay, and then you also use the phrase dissociative episode. And how does that relate to retrograde amnesia?
Well, that's, so again, dissociation is the breaking of the links of the chain of memory. And so a dissociative episode is the person is not totally present, but we can't see that necessarily externally. But they're going on, that's the automatic pilot piece. And so they're not, they're dissociated, they're cut off from, there's a term known as dissociation and depersonalization. This derealization, excuse me, derealization and depersonalization. Derealization is this is not really happening, and depersonalization is I am not really going through this. I'm in some sort of dream state. This isn't real for me.
Okay, and those are both forms of dissociation.
Yes.
Okay. And is that a more extreme thing than daydreaming?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so daydreaming sort of here on the scale and.
Well, daydreaming is more volitional in my term of thinking, and or more, like kids will daydream, or people who are driving may daydream, where a dissociative episode typically that we can have common everyday dissociative episodes, and then there are ones that are caused by the adrenaline and the cortisol and the fight or flight response, the fight, flight, freeze, or faint response, and it narrows our perception of the world.
Okay, all right. I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, may this witness be excused for defense
Yes.
and for the state?
Of course.
All right. Dr. Warford, you can step down, and we'll take our morning break. Why don't we be back on the record at 10:55? right, please be seated. I want to amend something I said earlier because frankly, I just think it was incorrect. And this is with regards to the defense witness, and you can have a seat. The defense witness, I've forgotten the name, but the person who has to use the wheelchair. As I understood the state's earlier objection, it was based on potentially discovery violation, which I've found there was not one. And then the only other thing I mentioned that I thought of was perhaps violative of a court order with regards to witnesses. But the more I thought about it, witnesses are excluded from coming into the courtroom and seeing the testimony of other witnesses, but there's no general order to witnesses not to speak with one another. And in fact, this person wasn't even a witness at the time. So I understand the state's concern, and certainly it can be grounds for cross-examination, but I guess I'm no longer seeing what the point of a 104 hearing would be, unless there's some other basis for a 104 hearing.
Yeah, and I'll clarify my objection too, Your Honor. I agree that when defense disclosed that they just found out about this witness 3 days ago, that alleviated our concern that they've known about him for a long time. And so I would almost would have withdrawn my objection to him as some sort of discovery violation. I'd further agree with Your Honor that that he wasn't a witness. So the exclusion from the courtroom, the exclusion from paying attention wouldn't apply to him. He wasn't a witness for the state, wasn't a witness for defense. And wasn't a witness that either side had intentionally sort of left off so that he could violate, or so that he could watch. So I agree with all of that. Our objection still is that he has watched and absorbed some of this information, that he has talked to them, and that he himself has reached out to defense and is attempting to make himself a witness. And the timing of it, and the fact that he has this information and has never come forward with it before, I find it suspect. And I just think that we should put him on for a 104 hearing to essentially inquire as to his the level of knowledge he has, independent from what he's saying. And I guess so. I think the 104 is appropriate because the 104 is for the basis of knowledge. So the information that he's going to be relaying.
So sorry not to cut you off. Let me summarize what I think. So the basis of the 104 hearing would be to ensure that what he's testifying to is based on his personal knowledge as opposed to hearsay?
Yes, essentially.
Okay. All right. I don't have an issue. That could be grounds for a 104 hearing, and we can do that. I just wanted to make it clear that earlier when I was talking about my order to exclude witnesses, it doesn't really apply in this case. So I just wanted to at least correct that mistake.
And I appreciate that, Your Honor. And I also, we didn't talk about our sort of secondary objection either.
Which is? Which
would be that what defense has provided appears to be just an immense amount of hearsay. And so the reason I didn't bring that up earlier, because it is secondary to the idea that he's even allowed to testify. Once it's determined that he's going to be allowed to testify, then we have our hearsay objection as well. So.
Okay. All right.
And Your Honor, I'd be happy to provide a copy of the report. We don't have a report of this conversation that they had last evening, so it's hard to anticipate exactly what they're referring to. But what we would propose to have this witness testify to is all personal knowledge. It isn't something that he learned from somebody else. There may be the type of hearsay objection that he was in a conversation with Mr. Brophy, and we'd have to carefully craft the questions about what Mr. Brophy said during that conversation, but it's not like there's no personal knowledge.
And you now have both confused me because you're talking about a report regarding him that they have that you don't have?
No. We provided the report yesterday, and apparently they then talked to him last evening, and so many of these representations are new to us. We don't have a report of that conversation other than what's been said in court, so it's hard for me to anticipate and understand exactly what that is. But our part of it, I believe, is just straightforward witness testimony. It's not like he learned something from somebody else,
All right. Well, I think what we'll do, let's not get too far into the weeds on this. I think I'll get a more complete proffer from defense whenever this witness is going to be called as to what specifically they're calling him for. If you think there are still issues with his personal knowledge based on their proffer, then perhaps we'll have a 104 hearing. But I don't want to say definitively one way or the other whether we're going to need that hearing right now based on what I'm being told is a limited purpose for calling this witness.
And we will provide that, a written report over the lunch hour.
Okay, all right. Let's bring the jury back in then.
Just, I don't want a situation where we talk to each one of these writer witnesses and I get sideways with the court, especially in front of the
Sure,
jury.
sure.
So what I've asked counsel, if we could ask Ms. Linda Smith, who the court has not heard from before, just a quick 104 hearing so that I have very, very clear lanes that I can drive in.
Okay, all right. Is that the next witness?
Yes.
All right. And you think this will be a relatively short
Well,
104?
all I really want to talk to her about with respect to 104 is, it's my understanding that in late 2017, that Nancy Brophy told her she was planning to buy a gun, but she doesn't know whether Ms. Brophy ever bought a gun. The court has previously ruled that we can ask people whether Ms. Brophy told them that she bought a gun. I actually think with respect to the plan to buy a gun, that we fit within the exception, but I want to be clear. I just want to be on the same page.
Sure, sure. No, I appreciate that. I really do. And just so we can sort of limit the 104 hearing, I do think the statement, she told me she was planning to buy a gun, at least that much, I think would come in under that exception. If there's something more, let's hear what she has to say. So you want to bring her in now
Oh,
for the
yes.
104 hearing?
Wait, no, that comes in.
And sorry, you said her name is Linda Smith?
Smith.
Okay.
Was before.
Smith, if you can just come on up here into the witness box. And what we're gonna have you do is step on into it, but don't have a seat just yet. We'll get you close to the microphone and my clerk will give you an oath.
Okay, I'll have you step just a little closer to that microphone if you can. You can step in front of that chair if you need to. Perfect, and I'll have you raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated, and you may
Thank you.
remove your mask. And then it might help if you scoot your chair up just a little closer. Thank you. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
My name is Linda Smith,
Can you spell the name as well?
Lindasmith.
All right, and there is some water there if you want it.
Oh, thank you.
Also, just so you understand what we're doing right now is just sort of some brief questioning so that we can figure out the parameters of what you can testify to. So this isn't your main testimony. This will be sort of limited questioning by the sides. But when you're ready, Ms. Maxfield.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Smith.
Good
Are you
morning.
nervous?
Yeah,
Okay, we're just test driving one line of questions so that you and I don't have a conversation in front of the jury that isn't within the rules.
oh, okay.
Okay. Do you know the woman sitting next to me?
I do.
And how long have you known her?
Over 10 years.
Are the two of you writing partners?
We are.
And what do writing partners do just generally?
We keep each other accountable for our deadlines. We brainstorm. We throw ideas off of each other. We help each other and encourage each other to keep going.
And would that have been true in late 2017?
Yes.
And in late 2017, was there a time that you and Ms. Brophy were together brainstorming story ideas?
Yes.
And in the context of that conversation, did Nancy Brophy tell you that she was planning to buy a gun kit?
Yes, in passing.
And do you know whether she ever bought one?
No.
That's my lane, Judge.
Do you want to ask any cross-exam on that?
I guess just, do you know when that conversation was?
I don't remember.
Can you give like a month, a year?
Um, I would say early 2017 is the best I remember.
And what was the context of the conversation?
We were talking about research, um, about, well, just research, how we research,
And early 2017, you think?
to the best of my recollection.
Thank you. No other questions, Judge.
Could I ask one more?
You have more?
Did we have a conversation yesterday?
Yes, we did.
And yesterday, did you tell me it was late 2017?
Oh my gosh, my memory is.
Let me just ask you this.
Yeah.
Are you certain it was in 2017?
No, I'm not. It was very in passing.
Okay.
Well, Judge, now I have more questions.
Well, I mean, I'm wondering if the questions are really getting at the issue. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, so do you know at all when this was?
2017.
So now you do think it was 2017?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Whatever.
The questions will be allowed and the answers will be allowed.
And I thought that the court was going to allow the questions so that we can talk about the fact that this was no secret. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can ask the questions.
Thank you.
And she can give the answers. We'll bring the jury in now and go through the testimony.
Okay, Judge, I will mute for WebEx and go off record while I answer.
And so you can be seated. And Ms. Smith, can we have you state your name and spell the name, please?
My name is Linda Smith, LindaSmith.
All right, whenever you're ready, Ms. Maxfield.
Beth, were you previously sworn to tell the truth in this matter?
Yes.
just a minute ago.
Yes,
Do you know the woman sitting next to me?
I do.
And how do you know her?
We're writing friends.
And how long have you known her?
Over 10 years.
Can you describe, besides being writing partners, would you also, do you have a personal friendship with her?
Yes.
In terms of like casual friends?
I'd say we were close friends.
Can you describe for the jury the kinds of things that writing partners do together?
We're accountability partners. We keep each other on track for not procrastinating or for encouragement. We brainstorm together. We come up with ideas. We talk about plot structure, what order things happen in when you're writing a story, and lots and lots of brainstorming.
And would that include, when you talk about brainstorming, you talk about story development, sharing with each other ideas about
Yes.
stories that you're developing?
Yes.
And was that something that you and Ms. Brophy engaged in during the year of 2017?
Yes.
And how frequently would you guys meet?
About once a week,
Okay, sometimes more?
sometimes.
So in terms of particular conversations, is it easy for you to know that this happened in November, or this happened in October, or June?
No.
Okay. During the course of one of these conversations in which you and Ms. Brophy were discussing the story ideas, did Ms. Brophy tell you that she was planning to buy a gun kit?
Yes.
Do you know if she ever bought one?
No.
Are you personally uncomfortable with gun ownership?
I am.
Did you and Ms. Brophy ever have another conversation regarding?
No.
Besides talking about writing, were the two of you close enough to talk about your marriages?
Yes.
And how frequently would that happen?
Usually every other time we got together.
Did you confide in her regarding your own marriage?
I did.
And did you get the sense that she was confiding in you regarding hers?
I did.
Over the decade that you've known her, did you form an impression regarding the strength of Dan and Nancy's marriage?
I did.
And can you tell the jury your opinion of that marriage?
They had a really warm, wonderful, passionate, funny relationship. They loved to travel together. They loved to work together. Dan was Nancy's best cheerleader, and he liked to read her books.
Yes,
Yeah.
You're describing a pretty healthy marriage.
Oh, yes.
Was there ever a time over the course of the 10 years that you've known her that you noticed that there was a change, or that maybe there had been some deterioration in that marriage?
No.
Are you familiar with Ms. Brophy's writing process?
Yes.
Do you know what time of day she typically writes?
Nancy wrote a lot in the morning.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Have the jury step out for just 1 minute.
All rise for the jury.
I didn't rule because I don't know the basis of her knowledge.
We can explore that.
What's that?
We can explore that, Your Honor.
Well, since it's a state's objection, you want to ask a question in aid of objection.
Sure. Ms. Smith, how many times have you spent the night at the Brophy's home?
I didn't spend any nights at the Brophy home.
I don't think I have any further questions, Your Honor. The basis of my objection, and I can tell you this is going to continue to be an objection for most of these based on the interview reports that we've received, is that the information she's testifying to is based on what Ms. Brophy told her. If defense has another avenue in which they're getting it, I think just for future points, just because I think this is going to continue to come up, if they want to lay that foundation before they ask these questions, it might be helpful. But based on what she's just testified to, I don't know how she would have any personal knowledge as to what Ms. Brophy does in the morning when she gets up.
Here, I can
Go ahead.
explore. From time to time, did you and Ms. Brophy attend writing weekends together?
Oh, yes.
So while you've never been in the Brophy home, have you been with Ms. Brophy on mornings at these writer retreats?
Yes.
And at the writer retreats, were you able to observe the period in time in which Ms. Brophy was most actively writing?
Yes.
And when was that?
Mornings and early afternoon.
Okay, I'll allow her to testify to that to the extent you want a cross-examination. If you thought the original answer was too broad, you can do that.
Thank you.
But let's call the jury back in. All right, I did overrule the objection. Ms. Maxfield, if you wish to continue.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, before we broke, you had testified that you knew that I called you Ms. Brophy, I'm sorry, Ms. Smith. Before we broke, you testified that you knew that Ms. Brophy liked to write in the morning.
Yes.
From time to time, would you go to writers' retreats with Nancy Brophy?
Yes.
And About how frequently would those occur?
We would try to get together about once a quarter,
1 second.
of course.
And would the number of people who attended these writers' retreats change? Sometimes a few, sometimes a lot.
It averaged, yes, it would average between 4 and 8.
And sometimes were these writer retreats held in more dormitory settings where you were all kind of sleeping in the same space?
Yes,
And is that how you know that Ms. Brophy tended to have her focused writing time in the morning?
yes.
I want to shift back to the conversation that we had, and I'm sorry to do this, but the conversation we were having about the relationship between Dan and Nancy.
Yes,
You said that there wasn't a change
there was
that
not.
over 10 years, but did Nancy complain about Dan?
Not in any sort of hostile fashion. When people are in a relationship, of course, they're going to complain about each other, but it was always a very minor quibbles,
For example, did she complain about chickens?
very playfully.
Okay. But did she ever do things, let me ask you this, if you guys went to lunch and there was leftover food, what did Nancy do with it?
She would take it home to the chickens.
So she complained about the chickens, but she fed the chickens.
Oh, yes.
Did you get to spend time with Dan and Nancy together?
Yes.
And what did you observe personally?
They really liked each other. They would give each other those kind of in-joke glances at when they were together. They often were very playful. They had a very passionate relationship, and you could tell that Nancy really took care of Dan. She helped with his career. Dan helped Nancy with her career. They were each other's cheerleaders.
What about senses of humor?
Their senses of humor matched very well. It was very playful.
Did Nancy ever complain about the family's finances?
No,
When did you learn that Dan Brophy had died?
mid-morning of the day he died,
And how did you learn?
I had texted Nancy that morning to see if she wanted to do lunch and writing time. And she wrote back, no. Usually Nancy's responses were a little more chatty than that, so I had a very bad feeling. I knew something was wrong. After a couple of hours, she called and said there was a shooting at the school. And I said, was Dan okay? And she said no. So I got there as fast as I could. I printed out, well, I used to be a librarian, so my love language is information. So I just printed out a bunch of information from the web, like from AARP, all those things you're supposed to do when your spouse dies. And I took it over to her, and I kept her company that afternoon and evening.
Some witnesses have suggested that Ms. Brophy was not visibly upset by her husband's death.
Oh,
Was
she
that
was
your experience?
very visibly upset.
What did you see?
Nancy was, excuse me. Nancy was very sad. She cried. She asked what was she going to do now, and how she didn't want to be without Dan. She rested a little bit. I, of course, tried to feed her because that's what you do. And, but she was very much in shock, pale, her hands trembled, and she was very distraught.
Shortly after Dan died, did Nancy start clearing out the house?
The first thing she did when I came over the next morning was take care of the chickens. She made for sure that our mutual friend, who has a farm and already had chickens, were able to take them, and they cleaned out the refrigerator the very first thing to make sure that our friend got all the chicken feed that Dan had kept in the refrigerator.
Did you see her take any other steps to clear out the house? Did you know, for example, did you know whether she was getting ready to sell the house?
Not for a month or two. Pardon me.
Did you come to the house to help clean out parts of the house? Were you there for that?
Some of it, yes.
And do you remember about when that was?
It was the week after Dan died.
And what part of the house, if any, did you clear out?
I helped clear out the kitchen. And I believe I helped clear out her office and pack up books.
And her office is upstairs.
Yes.
Any other part of the house?
I think the living room. That's as much as I remember.
How many dates were you there doing that? Do you remember?
I think it was most of the week, and then I would come back during the next few months, but not every day.
Before Dan died, where would you place Nancy on the scale of pessimist to optimist?
Optimist.
How far onto the level of how far onto the scale of optimist would you put her?
Well, if here is someone who is completely grumpy and never expects the best, and here is pure Pollyanna, I'd say Nancy is about here.
Okay. Is she pragmatic?
Yes.
After Dan died, did you observe any difference in her level of optimism?
Yes. She was very sad.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Smith. The conversation you had with Ms. Brophy where she told you she was going to buy a gun kit, when was that?
Sometime in 2017.
Are you sure it was in 2017?
Yeah.
Did you not testify about 20 minutes ago that you in fact weren't sure if it was 2017 at all, outside the presence of the jury?
No, I said that I wasn't sure when in 2017 it was.
Okay, so all right, so you don't recall saying, just a second. I'm not certain it was in 2017 at all.
Did I say I wasn't sure when in 2017, or it wasn't 2017 at all?
It wasn't 2017 at all. Do you recall saying that?
I guess I thought I said it differently.
Okay. But you're not sure when, like what, couldn't tell you what month or anything that
No.
the conversation went.
It was very in passing.
Very in passing.
Mm-hmm.
And your testimony is that you met with Ms. Brophy all the time to talk about writing, pretty regularly, about once a week.
Yes.
And she never told you that she'd bought a gun kit.
No.
And you were interviewed by police in 2020, is that right?
I believe so.
And you never told the police about the gun kit or your knowledge that she'd purchased a gun kit, or that she was talking about a gun kit?
I don't remember.
You talked about the morning of Mr. Brophy's death and that you went over to Ms. Brophy's house that same day, is that right?
I did.
Do you recall or do you remember what time that was?
I have the time on my phone. I don't have it off the top of my head, so I'm trying to remember. It was between, I'm gonna say between 11 and 2 was when I went over there,
After the phone call from her.
after she called me.
Ms. Smith, do you have your phone with you?
It's out in the hall.
So you could go look for that and confirm what time. And your phone will tell you what time you went there?
Tell me what time I texted Nancy and said I was on my way.
Gotcha. Okay. And just 1 second. And Ms. Smith, was your testimony, and maybe I just heard you wrong, that the start of prepping for the house was a month or two later?
To sell the house,
Yeah, is that right?
to the best of my memory.
And later being the point in time of Mr. Brophy's death?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
If the phone records reflect a call around about 10:30, does that early, first of all, there was one call where you wanted to know if she was gonna go meet you for
I
lunch.
think it was I don't know if it was a call or a text at this point.
Okay.
I'd have to look it up.
What, in terms of time frame, does 10:30 sound about right?
It does.
And would a call at 2:43 between you and Ms. Brophy seem about right for the second communication?
Yes.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me just check with the sides. I think it's probably fine, but for defense?
That's fine. And is Ms. Smith allowed to be in the courtroom after this?
She will be if she's excused by the state too. Is she excused by the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so you can step down, and if you want to remain in the courtroom, you can. All right, and who is the defense next witness?
Darla Lukenbaugh?
Okay. All right, Ms. Lukenbaugh, if you can just come up here to the witness box where you see a chair and a computer monitor, and we'll have you step on into it, but don't have a seat just yet. We'll have you step in and step close to the microphone, and my clerk here will give you an oath.
Okay. I'll have you please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then I'll have you slide just a little closer to that mic if you can. Thank you.
You can, if you want to move it closer to you too, that's fine. Sort of bends
Oh,
down.
gotcha.
Yeah,
Thank
there you
you.
go.
And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
Darla Lukenbaugh, Darla Lukenbaugh.
All right, and Ms. Lukenbaugh, if you want it, there is water there to your side,
Oh, thank you.
and then when defense is ready.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Lukenbaugh, how are you employed?
I work at a chemical manufacturing company as an admin.
And what city do you live in?
I live in Sile. I live in Sile.
Okay.
It's like one of those places you see on the weather map.
Yeah,
Do you know the woman sitting next to me?
I do.
And how did you meet her?
When she joined the Romance Writers of America and the Rose City Romance Writers here in Portland.
So those are two different groups?
Yes,
Is one national and one local? Or?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And about how long ago did you meet?
Oh, 2005?
Over the course of the time that you've known each other, did you spend time at her house?
Yes.
And would you sometimes come up to spend the weekend at her house when you had meetings?
Yes, we had early morning meetings, so she offered her guest room.
And when you came up here to meet, did you also get to interact with Dan Brophy?
Yes.
And about how many times do you think that happened, that you came up and stayed with her?
Probably for at least a year while we were on the board. Sue Lute and I were on the board, so we would come up and spend Friday night and go to the board meeting early Saturday morning. So probably 12 times, I'm guessing, because it was once a month.
During those times, did you get to actually talk with Dan Brophy?
Oh, yeah.
And did he prepare any meals for you or
Yes.
anything like that?
Yes, every time.
Can you just describe him generally, your impression of him?
Quiet, but dynamic. You know, he just did his thing, and we appreciated the food that he made. So it was really nice, and we would sit down and talk. He was someone who didn't suffer fools, just very straightforward.
So even though he was quiet, for example, would he have dinner with you?
Not generally.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of women, so
You say that like it's a bad thing.
well, it can try some people's patience.
But even though he wasn't eating with you, would he create the meals and attend
Yes.
to you while you were there?
Oh, yes, yeah.
So would you describe him generally as, even though he was a quiet host, a good host?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Over the course of the time that you've known Nancy Brophy, have you also attended various writer retreats?
Yes.
And how many do you think you guys have attended together?
Oh, my gosh. Dozens, if not close to 100, really.
And at these writer retreats, would you have occasion to observe Ms. Brophy as she was working on various stories or books?
Yes.
Can you describe generally the process of story development?
For a lot of writers, it starts as a what if kind of statement in your head. It's an internal process. You're constantly just trying to figure out what a character would do in a certain situation, and if that works for your story or not. We would brainstorm, friends and I, and a lot of times it's easier to brainstorm out loud, but some writers actually do a lot of internal writing, and then they kind of have the situation and then present it, and you can kind of see where plot holes are.
Did you have the opportunity to observe? Let's just go back to a time maybe in Seattle at an Emerald
Okay.
City
Yes.
workshop. Do you have a memory of observing Ms. Brophy during that workshop?
Yes.
And what was she doing?
Just staring off into space, seemed to be not paying attention, and I was kind of curious about that.
And how long would she just stare into space?
Oh, half hour at least, just, and yeah, so that's
And did you
that's
see-
kind of the plotting process.
Okay,
It's
and
pretty
did
much
you see
staring
that on
into
other
space.
occasions as well?
Oh, yeah.
At this end of this period, when she would stare into space, was she then able to describe for you a story?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Well, it's not calling for hearsay yet. The question was just whether or not she described, if we start to get into what she described, then we might have an issue, but the question is fine.
Okay. And were you surprised by the detail in the story that she provided?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, she,
Objection, Your Honor. Now they're getting into details of what was said to her.
Your Honor, this isn't offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's offered for the level of detail that Ms. Brophy was able to provide after a period
She
of.
cannot testify, that'd be great too.
Okay, one objection, not two.
I apologize, Your
All right,
It's
Go ahead.
not offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's offered for the level of detail that Ms. Brophy was able to provide after brainstorming in her own head.
Your Honor,
what?
I would appreciate that counsel not say what the answer is going to be out loud.
Well, I don't know that she has said the answer. I'm going to overrule the objection. I'm going to allow the question and answer.
At the end of this process, was Ms. Brophy able to provide you a detailed story?
yes.
And was that amazing to you?
It's, yeah, absolutely amazing. My process is I get very small chunks, and she was able to give like almost an entire story.
I want to take you to the winter of 2018. Were there times, including in the winter of 2018, that Ms. Brophy and you would brainstorm story ideas?
Yes.
And how frequently did that happen?
Anytime we were in the same space together.
Okay. And why would one writer want to brainstorm with another writer a story?
It goes to those plot holes. Sometimes you can come up with a story that you think is great in your head. And when it comes down to the actual events, like, can a character do this one specific thing? Other writers can see the plot hole isn't going to work, that it's, it's not feasible.
Okay. So part of this brainstorming process is so that a writer can determine whether their story is even plausible,
Correct.
whether the character could even realistically do the things that she's going to have the character do.
Correct.
So in 2018, was there a time that you and Ms. Brophy were driving in a car and engaged in this brainstorming process?
Yes.
And in the context of the brainstorming process, did Ms. Brophy tell you whether she had purchased a gun kit?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll allow it based on my earlier ruling. Actually, hold on. I'll have the jury step out.
All rise.
All right, everyone can be seated. So I ruled, and this may have been last week, but I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the nature of the objection. I did rule earlier that statements could be offered that Ms. Brophy told various people she had purchased a gun kit, and that the purpose in offering that was not for truth of the matter asserted, that she in fact bought a gun kit, but to rebut the inference that was raised by the state that this was kept a secret from people. So I did make that ruling. So is this objection something different?
Here's my concern, Your Honor. I have these defense investigator reports, so I am going off of what I anticipate is going to be said because
Sure.
of what I'm told.
Sure.
This report and most of these reports, everything that these witnesses are testifying to are things that Ms. Brophy told them. Specifically, what I anticipate defense is going to get into, and it's hard to tell from the questions sometimes, is that there was a discussion about why or what story specifically that she was writing related to the need for gun parts, et cetera, et cetera. If the question is simply, did she tell you she bought a gun kit, and that's the end of it, I agree that that's the basis of Your Honor's ruling. But particularly, this is in 2018. It is not like Ms. Smith's somewhat unclear timeline testimony that appears to have occurred before the purchase of the ghost gun. So it's a future plan, and thus why it comes in. This is after that has occurred. It is not a future plan any longer. And they're offering these statements for the truth of the matter asserted, specifically to prove what Ms. Brophy's the way that she wrote, the way that she went off into space, in this particular instance, that she was writing this exact story. All of these things that we have in all of these statements are, I think, what they're trying to get in, and it's all hearsay. The only reason they have this information is because Ms. Brophy is telling people what she was doing as she was staring off to space. In this particular case, and I'm going backwards, but in this particular case, that she is what she's brainstorming, or in the context of brainstorming.
All right, so let me make sure I understand the testimony that defense is seeking to elicit. I don't think there's any question that the basis of knowledge is what Ms. Brophy said to the witness. I do think that may or may not be hearsay, and there may or may not be exceptions given the context. My understanding, based on the state's objection, but defense will correct me if I'm wrong, is there's no concern with the question about, if this is forthcoming, did Ms. Brophy say she had bought a gun kit? Under my earlier ruling, I would allow that. But if we're starting to then move into an explanation after the fact of why she bought the gun kit, then my ruling earlier would be that someone could not testify to that.
Your Honor, Ms. Lukenbaugh and I had a very detailed conversation yesterday in which the two of us tried to, and I made clear to her what the court's ruling was. I don't think I intend to elicit another statement that Ms. Brophy made.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything wrong at all with asking Ms. Lukenbaugh about the context within which this statement was made, and the fact that they were brainstorming stories, which is what I've asked and which was answered.
Okay, so you've already asked that question. It's already been answered, and I don't know if the question has even been asked yet. Maybe it was just asked about, did she say she'd bought a gun kit? I can't remember what your very last question was, I'll be honest.
I think I did, and I'll repeat it when the jury comes back
Sure.
in case I didn't.
And so to be clear, Your Honor, part of the objection is coming from the question, because the question was, in the context of brainstorming, did she tell you she bought a gun? If she had just asked, has she told you she bought a gun kit, I wouldn't have had the same objection. So just so the court understands, I'm not trying to be unreasonable, but she's asking in the context of these conversations. I appreciate that she's instructed the witnesses, but part of the, I think, concern is I'm reading these reports. We've had this issue repeatedly, and so that it's when the question is asked like that, it's inviting or suggesting there was additional conversation.
Your Honor, there may have been additional conversation, but that's not what I'm asking her. I'm not asking her what my client said or what my client did. I'm asking whether they were having a general brainstorming conversation, and whether this statement with respect to the gun kit occurred at that time. I haven't asked her a single thing about what was said beyond that.
No, I understand, and so I will overrule the objection and allow the question given the way in which it's being asked. And obviously, if the state is worried with other witnesses that we're about to go into improper testimony, then we'll visit it. But we'll call the jury back.
We'll go ahead and get the jury and we'll go off record.
And I did overrule the objection, so Ms. Maxfield, if you want to ask the question, you can.
Yes. Ms. Lukenbaugh, I don't remember where we left off, but I think my question to you was, in the course of this brainstorming exercise that you and Ms. Brophy were participating in, did she tell you that she had purchased a gun kit?
Yes.
After Dan Brophy died, was Nancy Brophy worried about paying her mortgage or keeping her house?
Yes.
Do you know what happened to Dan Brophy's chickens after Dan died?
I took them
And why did you take them?
because I own a farm. Excuse me. I own a farm and have chickens, so I offered to take them.
Does Nancy Brophy know much about chickens or feeding chickens?
No. No.
Did you offer to do that as a friend?
Yes.
Right after Dan died, were you there when there was concern about finding the will?
Yes.
And what happened? Do you remember?
She didn't find it for over a month.
Did she express any worry over that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was very concerning.
Soon after Dan died, was there a conversation or did you see anything wrong with Nancy's phone?
Yes, it was broken.
Okay, was there a conversation about that?
Yes. Jesse Smith asked, why don't you get that fixed? And
Hearsay objection.
I guess I'm perplexed as to why a question would be hearsay. It doesn't assert.
Well, it's not
anything.
necessarily the question, but it sounds like the answer. She started to talk about what Mr. Smith asked, and it sounds like she's about to talk about what the answer was. So I will sustain that.
But you personally observed that the phone was cracked?
yes.
I asked you generally just about the writing process. Many of us don't have stories rolling around in our heads. So I wonder if you can describe for the jury generally this story writing process and what you experience.
Um,
How internal is it?
oh, it's very internal. You get the what if question, and then you extrapolate like how a character would act, and you get scenes in your head like a movie, and then you write it down, and more scenes come off of that, like how a character acts or talks, and so it's very internal.
Is it immersive?
Oh yes, absolutely.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
All right, let me ask, does the state know how long the cross-examination will be?
I don't have any questions, Your Honor.
Okay, all right, then may this witness be excused,
Yes, Your Honor.
and for the state as well.
Yes.
All right, you can go ahead and step down then, and we'll take our lunch recess and be back at 1:30.
All right.